What is good, everyone? This is your host, Deanna Kuempel with Label Free Podcast. To live your best life, you must live label free. We have a special guest joining us from Israel. His name is Arieh Green. I was close.
Yeah.
He is the Chief
Yes.
Strategy Officer at Gigawatt Global and also the author of My Israeli Trail, Finding Peace in the Promised Land. Thank you, Arieh, for joining us today. Oh, that rhymed.
That's right. It
Can
did.
you
Thank you, Deanna. Thank you for being here.
can you can you introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about your background?
Sure. I was born in Washington, D.C., in America. I'm an American citizen, but I moved to Israel over 35 years ago. I'm also a Jew and ended up finding my way to Israel and living here for most of my adult life, the last 35 years, as I said. And I spent some time in government in the Prime Minister's office. I spent a lot of time in business, mostly high tech. I work now with a renewable energy platform, bringing solar and other renewable energy projects to Africa, to some of the world's poorest people. And I wrote a book called My Israel Trail about the hike that I did on the 1,000-mile Israel National Trail, which, as you know, I set out on that trek just after my divorce was finalized. And so the book is as much about getting over healing, getting over my divorce, which was not something I had looked for, as well as a description of the actual hike itself.
Wow, that you've had a very interesting life. So say hi, Athena. She's being a little wiggle worm and playing with the other one. I love that though. I
That's
love
okay.
that you went on the hike and found some healing. So can you tell us about that process? Because I feel like more and more people are connecting with healing from things in their life.
Yeah, I think it's very true. I've often said, I love, by the way, Dan, I love having the dogs around. It really makes this into much more of an informal kind of conversation sitting in your living room than a lot of these kind of interview situations normally is set up for. Yeah, I definitely have noticed both in the responses to my book and the talks that I've given, everybody has personal challenges to face. We're all looking for some sort of personal growth, whether we're the kind of person that picks up books to read about personal growth or just look for different, learning experiences in our own lives. A lot of people have found the messages that I share in my book resonating with them, whether they're facing divorce themselves or death, God forbid, or losing a job, or the other kinds of challenges that we all face.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, I mean, I've had my own fair share throughout my lifetime, and my husband passed away 5 years ago, and so it's
Hmm.
been an interesting journey the last 5 years. But I've definitely come to a lot of peace. I'm very happy in my life, so I can understand that journey of healing and trying to just to find peace around that in the pain because I think a lot of people can get caught up in that pain and carry it for so long that it just becomes so heavy that it's lighten your load a little bit. Like
Yeah.
let's be better human beings. Let's be better human beings. So to write a book is a pretty daunting task. I feel like that's a lot of work. Um, what
True.
made you decide? What made you decide to say, "Hey, I'm going to take this on and write a book"?
Well, the truth is that I didn't set out to write a book. Um, I basically uh, I basically set out on this trip to find the kind of healing that we've been talking about. Um, and in the end, towards the middle of the journey itself, the trek itself, I actually was staying for the weekend over Shabbat, Sabbath, with friends, and they asked me to kind of share some insights from the trip itself with some friends of theirs sitting around on a Sabbath afternoon, a Shabbat afternoon, and having kind of had this conversation over an hour where I talked about some of the things that I'd been learning, that I'd written up in my journal, uh, literally lessons from the physical trail, which I ended up being able to apply to my situation, finding myself alone and sad and angry and frustrated and resentful and well, the the drill. That's kind of when I started thinking maybe there's something to write here, but it wasn't my original intention.
Yeah. How long did it take you to write your book?
Oh, the book took like 3 years, and the book took longer to write by far than the actual hike. The hike was 2 months, 2 months long. I did hike
My gosh,
alone.
2 months?
Yeah, it was a solo trek where I was all on my own, carrying a 50-pound pack, and I was 51 at the time. It's kind of thing to hear in Israel the 21-year-old crowd usually does, not the 51-year-old crowd. And
Yeah.
it was a real challenge, physically, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, and that's kind of what also led to the book itself, was marrying the challenges that I faced and the lessons I learned to help me overcome them with the situation I obviously was in my outside life, not on the trail, and that was
Yeah.
kind of part of the end of the book.
How did you prepare for that hike or the trek, whatever you want to call it?
Well, I grew up in California doing a lot of hiking as a kid, as a teenager, as a camp counselor, as a college student. And I've done a lot of hiking here in Israel too. We have kind of a national tradition where every school child goes at least once a year, if not more often, on an overnight hike around the country with kind of a this idealistic concept of getting to know the country. So I have three children. I accompanied them, each of them, over 12 years of schooling, to at least one trip every year. So that was 3 or 6 trips every year. My family did a lot of hiking. So hiking was something I loved and was familiar with. Doing a trek like this, though, both alone and nonstop and with a 50-pound pack on my back, that I wasn't so prepared for. So I read a decent bit. I studied the unofficial guide to the Israel Trail, maps and what have you. I took a few test trips with rocks in a backpack to make sure I could I could walk a good 12 to 15 miles a day with this kind of a backpack on. But the truth is, most of the preparation that I did started on the first day of the trek, which is why the third or fourth week of the trek, I finally got into stride, had learned enough of the lessons to keep myself on the trail and not killing my back or what have you. But I didn't do
Yeah.
that much preparation beforehand.
So how that is 2 months. That's a long time. So you're just out there by yourself, just keep going.
Yeah, well, the trail itself, as I said, kind of the 21-year-old crowd after serving in the Israeli Defense Forces kind of are the usual cohort, but there are also many others who hike it sometimes, or I guess most often, not as a through trail, but rather doing a day here or there. Older groups, adult groups, children's groups, what have you. So most days I would run into somebody on the trail. In writing the book, when I was reviewing my journal, I discovered, and I wouldn't have guessed this if I hadn't written it down. But I counted up, there were a total of 12 days out of the 42 days I actually hiked. I didn't hike on the Sabbath, on Shabbat, but I hiked 6 days
Okay.
a week. And there were 12 days in the course of those 42 days where I did not see a single soul from morning to night, where I really was alone.
Whoa.
Most of the other
Wow. That's
days,
wild.
the, yeah, it really was wild. There were most of the days I was either passed by kind of a younger cohort moving faster than me, or I would meet people coming the other way. And it's not all in the desert because a lot of it on the trail is in the hills of Jerusalem or the mountains and the forests of the north of the country and the Galilee along the coast. So, but yeah, 12 days without seeing a single soul from morning to night. That was definitely one of the peak elements of the experience.
Yeah, I would say. So now what do you do with food? Do you have
Well, so
food in
you
your
carry,
backpack?
yeah, you carry your food with you, like any other through trail. You have to have your supplies. You
Yeah.
can resupply. Certainly, in the north and the center of the country, you're bound to pass a small village or a town or a gas station or something. In the south, I had to actually plant to bury food and water in 6 different locations, two of which I actually paid somebody to do for me because with a kind of a jeep travel company, that's what they do because I don't have
Yeah.
a 4x4 to get off road into the mountains and leave a few liters of water for myself or what have you. But yeah, otherwise you just pack it with you. And as I said, there are a few days where you're going for 2 days without any resupply, so you have to plan that pretty well in advance.
I would think so. That's pretty intense. I don't know if I'd ever take that. I've done a lot of different things as far as like as an athlete, but that's something I don't know. I would be open to it, but I would probably be a little nervous about it, doing something like that by myself.
I had some friends who were nervous about my doing it by myself, and
Ah,
we ended up creating a thing where one of my kids was kind of my general connector. My daughter, who was living at home, just having finished serving in the Israel Defense Forces, and so I would message her kind of every day or every other day, telling her where I am, where I was planning on going. So this we had the agreement really to help my friend Hadass, a friend, old friend, and she was very worried about me going alone. So it was more for her than for me or my kids. But uh, there was this agreement that if Moria, my daughter, didn't hear from me for a day, that was okay because maybe there just wasn't reception wherever I was. But I had to make sure to either send her a message, turn on my phone and send a message, or find somebody on the trail who was going off the trail who could send a message so that every other day at least she would know where I was and where I was heading. And if she didn't hear from me for more than 48 hours, she was allowed, or Hadass was allowed to call out the search and rescue. That
well,
never
that's
happened,
good that you
thankfully.
have. That's good you have that lined up. So you have some questions here. I'm gonna pick one of these. Um, how do you define what the result of real peace in the Middle East will look like? That's an intense
Oh,
question.
it's a question I kind of hadn't really thought about since you had asked me to kind of uh, throw a few interesting questions at you. But the truth is, the question of how we define real peace, I think, gets to the core of any discussion about the Arab-Israel conflict or what's going on in this part of the world. And well, to be frank, my next book, which I'm working on now, applies the 5 lessons that I learned on the trail that helped me get over my divorce and are helpful to anybody facing these kind of personal challenges. My new book is applying those 5 elements to the Arab-Israel conflict to find real peace. So your question is not completely out of line. The short
So
answer is this. Yeah, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, well, go ahead. Give the short answer, but then I'm going to follow up with another question because you mentioned the
Okay.
5 lessons, and I want to hear about those.
I don't usually like to kind of throw out a summary because it sounds both trite and each of these lessons are based on literally weeks, if not months and years of suffering and pain and reflection and study and what have you. But I will do so because I think it's okay to try and If you can't summarize some even profound ideas relatively briefly, then there's something wrong with the way that you're generating those ideas. So the 5 lessons that I learned on the trail start with humility, a sense of perspective on kind of how what our place is in the universe. That was a lesson I learned while trudging hour after hour, day after day in the desert in the south, in the Negev desert in Israel. And the second lesson is acceptance, simply an acknowledgement of the reality that we face, whether it's being on the side of a mountain and losing the trail, or whether it's being divorced, or in your case, unfortunately, losing a spouse. This idea of acknowledging that we're not in control of everything. So it's related to humility, but it's an acceptance of reality. You know, that pithy aphorism of grant me the wisdom to accept the things I cannot change and the like. That was the second lesson. The third lesson has a lot to do with appreciation for the blessings that are in our lives. Gratitude, really, gratitude for me in the sense of the privilege of living here in Israel. After 2,000 years of dispersion of the people of Israel, we've returned to our ancestral homeland and created this miracle of a modern nation state called Israel. Or the gratitude I had for my friends and family who were so supportive of me in the course of the divorce, and also in the course of the hike on the trail, and gratitude on the trail itself for the guidance and the wisdom that was offered by the trail guide, the author Yaakov Sar of the Trail Guide, as well as support of what are called trail angels, who are complete strangers who open their homes to you and let you come and stay or have a shower or give you a meal or what have you. So gratitude was very much and that was very personal for me too, because even given the pain of the divorce, I was incredibly grateful for the 28 years of marriage that we had shared and the children we had raised and the life we built here in Israel. The fourth lesson is forgiveness, which to a certain extent was necessary for me in terms of my healing. Because as much as I intellectually recognize the right of my wife as an adult to make whatever decision was right for her, and to break up the marriage and basically destroy our family as we knew it. I recognized that as an adult, she had that right, but that's not the same as really heartfelt, deep forgiveness of the choice that she made and the pain that she caused. And so that forgiveness for me was pivotal in terms of my healing, and it was based on a lot of that humility and gratitude and acceptance that I just described. And the last lesson is basically what I learned in the last 2 weeks of as I realized that I'm going to stop this hike. I'm going to be done soon. And I'm going to end up
Yeah.
back home alone, still divorced. And this idea of having a goal, of having an objective on various different levels was something that I had discovered back in college reading Frankl's Man's Search of Meaning. You may be familiar in terms of your own reading or knowledge. Um, but his basic thesis that you have to have a reason to live, to give your life meaning, was something that for me, it was kind of obvious on the trail. I had goals, my
Sure.
goal every day was to reach the night camp or wherever I had buried the water, and my goal in the trek itself was to finish this kind of odyssey of hiking the Israel National Trail. But I started in that last week to set myself other goals, personal, professional, and so that's the fifth lesson: having a sense of purpose to give meaning to your life. Those were the 5 lessons basically that I write about in the book and that I've learned from the physical challenges of doing the hike, which then obviously were translatable. You can imagine, like intuitively, to as well as how I've described it to the position I found myself in, divorced, alone, and kind of trying to figure out how to move on with my life.
Yeah, wow, that's pretty profound, and those are some very important lessons to learn. Like that had to be quite the journey. Like, wow, I'm blown away. Very cool.
Well, thank
Very
you.
cool.
Thank you for
Should
saying
we go
so.
back to other question, or should we ask a different one? Because I'm like,
Sure. No, that's it's obviously up to you. But I can now that I've mentioned the 5 lessons, I think it's almost simple intuitively. If you think about the Arab-Israel conflict, this last century or more of hostility from the Arab and Muslim world to the very idea that the Jewish people, as a nation, not as a religious group, but the people of
yeah,
Israel wanting to reestablish our sovereignty in the Promised Land, in the Holy Land, in the land of Israel. And the basic parameters of what I'm going to suggest is a radical departure from the usual discussions about how to bring peace to the Middle East. Most people talk about maps and borders and giving those who self-identify as Palestinian Arabs some sort of independence of their own state. And I've suggested, or I am suggesting in my new book, something radically different. And that is, we have to start, all of us, Arabs and Jews, Israelis, Palestinians, Muslims around the world, or what have you, we have to start with a sense of humility. We have to have a certain acceptance that the reality is what it is.
yeah,
History has brought us to the point we're at today. We have to have a great sense of gratitude and appreciation for all of the miracles that have brought us to this point. And I mean that about Arabs and Jews. And the sense of forgiveness may be the most central element. The Arab world has to forgive Israel our insistence on living, and for the Jews, our insistence on the justice of our return to our ancestral homeland. And the Jews have to forgive the Arabs for the last 100 years of hostility and attacks and anger and rejection. And with that sense of forgiveness, the Arabs also have to forgive the Israelis for our defensive military operations, because people, just as we have to forgive the Arabs their terrorist attacks, they have to forgive us our defensive military operations, because many people have been injured or died or displaced because of this animosity over the last 100 years. And the
yeah,
last application, of course, is this question of having a goal. If we all recognize Israel had a goal, it was not just to create a nation state for the Jewish people. Our goal and our mission as a people, even before we had the state, was to provide for the benefit and the welfare of our people and others who are under our authority. Our goal as the Jewish people really can be summed up in this wonderful Hebrew phrase, to repair the world, to make the world a better place. And that's one of the reasons that obviously you're familiar, and so are our listeners or viewers, with many of the technology advances and other um, successes of the modern state of Israel. The point is that our goal has not simply been, oh, we need independence. Our goal was much, much broader than that. Um, and the independence that we sought and that we achieved, bringing the Jews back to an active role in the world stage, uh, is something that has continued since the founding of the state. The Arab and Muslim world have to have a goal that goes beyond either destroying Israel, which obviously is not a goal that I or most right-thinking people will accept as a legitimate objective that some of them have, but they also need a goal that's much more profound than just the establishment of another Arab state. That's a reasonable goal to aspire to try and find a way for those who self-identify as Palestinians within the Arab nation to express their independence in some entity. But their goal should be providing for the welfare of their people. Their goal
For
should
sure.
be helping them make the world a better place, whether it's technology or agriculture or aid to other countries, what have you. And I think that's what makes this whole idea very, very different.
Yeah.
And now you can see how it's kind of based on those same five lessons, just applied through a lens to the Arab-Israel conflict that might, if it's to be adopted, might actually be our first real chance for real peace in 100 years of animosity, where all the other attempts have been based on partition, separation, borders, all these other more kind of practical, tangible issues, which have never gotten to the root of the conflict, which is
Yeah.
the hostile rejection of any legitimacy that's given to Israel as an independent state. So there you go.
Well, here's hoping. Here's hoping that that you know what, one day there will be peace, because I think that we just need peace everywhere. Before we wrap things up, can you please drop all your links or where anybody can find you if they want to like purchase your book? Where could they find your book and all that good
Oh,
stuff?
sure. All right. Thanks, Deanna. I appreciate the opportunity. So the book's website is www.myisraeltrail.com. And there are a lot of other links there and excerpts and pictures and what have you. The book is available on Amazon and the Book Depository in Barnes and Noble. Again, it's My Israel Trail: Finding Peace in the Middle East, Finding Peace in the Promised Land. And anybody who wants to reach me can also, there's an email link there on the website at myisraeltrail.com that people can obviously reach out to me personally by email if they have a specific question or they have an interest in getting the book signed by me, or I'm also very happy to do online talks. And please God, as the coronavirus fades away, as it were, I'll be traveling again. So I like to give a lot of talks in synagogues and churches and community centers and universities and otherwise.
I love it. I love it. Well, Arya, this has been a pleasure to have you. Is there any final words of wisdom or advice you'd like to leave with the audience?
Oh, sure, because we haven't talked about so many different topics that I would be happy to cover. But one is, if you've never been to visit Israel, Um, it's really a phenomenal, phenomenal experience, and I would encourage anybody who has ever considered, or even if you haven't considered, to put that onto your bucket list. And if you do come to Israel, take an hour, or a half a day, or a whole day. You don't have to do the whole thing for 2 months as a trek, but to hike along the Israel Trail is to literally walk in the footsteps of our ancestors, in the footsteps of the prophets. And whether you're a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim or atheist or what have you, the poignancy of hiking the land of the prophets is incomparable, and that's aside from the physical beauty and the physical challenges in the forests of the north and the Galilee and the deserts of the south and the Negev. Just come and visit, and if you do, be in touch with me. Let me know, and I'll be happy to share some of my homemade wine with you, sitting on our balcony watching the sunset over the Sorek Valley.
Beautiful. I might have to take you up on that. Well, thank you very
I'd be
much for being
delighted.
and sharing your story. You guys, this is your host, Deanna Kuempel with Label Free Podcast. Live your best life. You must live label free. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share. And I'll be back soon with more dynamic guests.